Welcome to the Death Squad on Bill Russo's Short Story Theatre. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not kill. It is a commandment. Perhaps the number one commandment. Thou shalt not kill. But what if there is a war? A conflict pitting one nation against another? Then, my friend, in that case, thou must kill. And even your local clergyman will hand you a rifle and a chocolate bar, pat you on the back, and send you off to kill. Thou must kill. Questions. Questions of life and death, these are the stuff of which this tale is made. Do we have answers to the question? Let's find out as we listen to Bill Russo's play, for short story theater, titled, The Death Squad.
Near the end of the American Civil War in the winter of 1864, I was assigned to Fort Washington in Maryland. After dozens of bloody battles and campaigns in the Deep South for more than 3 years, I was looking forward to a rest. We all knew that peace would soon come, and that the Army of the South was on its last legs. On a chilly November morning, with 7 other members of my outfit, I rode through the gates of the fort. I had a quiet day and a peaceful night. But all too soon, it was morning. The very next morning, my hopes for a restful stay at Fort Washington were shattered when new orders were issued for me and the 7 other troopers who arrived with me. We were notified that we were to become the death squad of Fort Washington. There were more than 400 prisoners condemned to die, and we were told that we were going to be the firing squad, in charge of killing 80 convicts a day. The following morning, at 9 o'clock, we took our place on the killing field. From that day forward, every day, Monday through Friday, the prisoners would be brought out in groups of 8, and lined up, just 20 paces in front of us. I could never forget that first day. We were so close to the convicts that I could see the tears well up in their eyes, and then fall slowly down their sunken cheeks. I was the first shooter on the left. Next to me in the line of 8 was Private Jed Larson. We ended up calling him Spooky Larson for several reasons, one of which was because he had the odd habit of crying out in mortal anguish each time he killed one of the condemned. And so we were lined up, elbow to elbow. 8 men of the death squad, each with his rifle, aimed at one of the 8 condemned prisoners. The men scheduled for an appearance before the death squad were a motley lot. Some were deserters, some were charged as cowards in battle, others were prisoners of war, or spies, and some of them were just plain soldiers who made the mistake of being on the wrong side of a war. And a few of the convicts were simply cutthroat killers. Every morning the routine was the same. Promptly at 9 o'clock, the death squad took its place, 8 abreast, on a line, only 20 paces from the men they would have to kill. 5 minutes after the first batch of 8 criminals were shot, the next group of 8 mournful prisoners would be lined up. No hoods were placed on their heads, they had to meet their deaths with a bare face. They were not bound either by hand or by foot. Walking grudgingly to their death. They were prodded when necessary by the sharp bayonets of their escorts, the support team of the death squad. When the 8 dispirited prisoners were properly lined up, the captain gave the orders.
Ready! Aim! Fire!
We didn't bury those wretched creatures. We just left them there on the ground. The next batch of 8 was soon marched out, and they took their place on the killing ground, 4 paces in front of the bodies of those who had just been killed. When the new batch of convicts was lined up, the 8 riflemen of the death squad backed up 4 paces, so that once again, we would be exactly 20 paces from our targets. In a few moments, the captain would again give the orders, and just as before, we would shoot the prisoners, followed by the weird screaming of Spooky Larson.
Ready! Aim! Fire!
8 more bodies fell to the ground. Now there were 16 corpses on the killing ground. And 5 minutes later, the next group of 8 would be prodded at the point of a bayonet to take their places, 4 paces in front of the newly dead, and 8 paces in front of the first 4 that were dead. And once again, the 8 riflemen of the death squad would march 4 steps backward to maintain the 20 paces between them and their targets. And so it went all morning long, until finally, all 80 convicts were shot and killed by the firing squad of 8 riflemen of Fort Washington in Maryland. That's what we were. A firing squad. It was our job. It was our duty. We were a firing squad. But after some headline-grabbing newspaper writer called us the death squad, we became a pariah. We were shunned, even by our close friends. I grew to hate the death squad far more than I could ever hate the men we killed. After we had killed more than 200 prisoners, a whole new batch arrived. Now there were more than 1,600 condemned men waiting for their date with the death squad. Even if we had no new additions to the list, at 80 a day, it would take more than 3 weeks to kill them all. And if we did kill them all, it would mean that I was personally responsible for executing 160 men, many of whom were guilty of nothing more than loyalty to the town or city where they were born. I couldn't take it anymore. Peace was coming. Everyone knew that the South was on its last legs. Any day now, General Lee would surrender, and the war that tore apart the United States would finally be over. Maybe the prisoners would be pardoned. I wanted out. But the captain would not let me leave the death squad. I begged him. He said to me, "Private Shadow, the only way you will leave the death squad is if you are dead." I thought about it. One quick bullet to the head would end my misery. I really did think about it, but I guess I'm a coward. I decided it would be easier for me to keep killing prisoners than kill myself. I'm not proud of that, but it's true. The next day, I got back in line. I was the first on the left, and I shot at my targets with a complete aversion to killing them. My agitation increased with each new column of 8 convicts. By the time the 7th of the 10 groups of 8 was prodded into the killing ground, I was shooting with my eyes closed. I could not look upon death. I never wanted to see it again. I wanted out. I did not want to be a member of the death squad for even one more day. And the next day, something happened that sealed my fate. As I mentioned, we did not bury the dead.
We just left them on the ground where they fell. In the early morning, on the day after they were killed, the dead were dragged to a massive fire pit, and their corpses were burned. That process occurred between 6 in the morning and 9, when the death squad arrived at the killing ground for the day's work. Finally, one morning after a sleepless night, I decided to go to work early. I arrived at the killing ground just before 6 in the morning. I got there a few minutes before the disposal crew was due to arrive and dragged the corpses to the fire pit. I walked up to the grim death area. There were supposed to be 10 rows of dead bodies, 8 to a row. But I noticed that in the 8th row, there were only 7 bodies. There were also just 7 in the row behind. And again, in the row behind that, there were only 7 bodies. I walked slowly towards a tool shed that was about 30 feet behind the very first row of corpses. There was a steady rain falling. The area was very muddy. I saw 2 men lying on the ground on the shady side of the building. There was a third man, propped up against the side of the shed. He was wrapped in makeshift bandages that had been fabricated from shirts taken from dead bodies. He was covered in blood. His eyes were open. The 2 men lying down were alive, but just barely. I walked closer to the shed. The man who was propped up against the side of the shed tried to speak, but he could only manage a whisper, and I was not close enough to him to hear what he said. Just then, the disposal crew arrived, and when they saw that 3 men were still alive, they took the rakes they were carrying and beat to death the 2 men who were lying on the ground. They didn't kill the third convict right away, the one leaning against the shed. He spoke to them. I didn't hear what he said. He talked for a minute or 2 before he was silenced, when one of the disposal crew cracked his skull with a vicious strike from the rake he was carrying. The leader of the disposal crew gave an order to one of his men, who quickly mounted a horse and galloped away. The crew leader walked over to me and said, "Once in a while, we find a live one. Our orders are to kill them quickly, and not to talk about it. But in this case, we are going to have to talk about it." I didn't know what he meant. A few moments later, several riders galloped towards the shed. I saw that one of them was the captain, the leader of the death squad. He placed me under arrest and charged me with a capital crime. The captain told me that the man leaning against the shed told the disposal crew how he survived. He said that the man who was supposed to shoot him never took close aim at him, and he had his eyes closed. The convict identified me as the shooter with the closed eyes. The captain said that I was being discharged from the death squad, and I was very happy about that. No more killing for me. My happiness lasted for just a few seconds. It ended when the captain said that I was being charged with dereliction of duty, and that the punishment for that crime is death by the firing squad. I was bound by chains and taken to the cell block. The cell block they put me in was the next one scheduled for execution. I spent a sleepless night sitting on a hard bunk that had a wooden mattress. I was just waiting for the morning, and my final march to the killing ground.
The sun came out a while ago. The rain is gone. I'm just waiting for the big clock in the bell tower of the fort. Waiting for that old clock to ring 9 times. 9 bells, and then I will begin the death march. It's 9 o'clock in the morning now, and the first row of the condemned men is lining up on the killing field. The captain is ready to give the orders.
Ready! Aim! Fire!
That's it. 4 more men dead. My row is up next. We are walking to the killing field. We are standing 4 paces in front of the 4 corpses, who were just executed. In a few seconds, the captain will give the orders and I will be executed. I will die. Unless the soldier who is supposed to shoot me closes his eyes and misses. Perhaps that will happen, and I will only be wounded, and I will be able to escape. But I am looking at the firing squad now, and the rifleman just 20 short paces away from me is none other than Screamin' Spooky Larson. Spooky loves his job. I don't think he will be closing his eyes when he fires. We're lined up now. The captain is ready to give the orders.
Ready! Aim! Fire!
Questions. Questions of life and death, these are the stuff of which this tale was made. Do we have answers to the question? I think not. For Short Story Theatre, this is Basil Nightingale speaking, for Bill Russo, who wrote and directed this play. Short Story Theatre is on the podcast platform Spreaker, that's speaker with an R after the P, as well as all other podcast sites. We are also on YouTube. Thanks for being with us, and please, come back again soon, won't you?